This video is brought to you by Project FoundEd. Project FoundEd is a community of edtech founders that aim to make the edtech industry easier to navigate through collective voice and data. Learn more at projectfounded.org. Hi, welcome to this session of edTech Recharge Studio. I'm Dr. Kripa Sundar, and today I share with you some of my top tips for grant writing. For the purposes of this video, let's think through the process of submitting for grants. The first step is to review the solicitation, or also called request for proposals. This is a document that the funders outline what they're hoping to fund, and I would strongly recommend that you take the time to assess good fit for your organization. There are lots of grants there, and it's very tempting to go after each one. But it's very unlikely you're going to be able to recycle your grants without additional effort. So before you embark on this grant writing journey, ensure your strategic priorities are in place and that the grant is a good fit. Then comes towards finding partners. A lot of these grants will require you to demonstrate partnerships, whether it's with researchers or school administrators, or in some cases, both. The next step is one that we often find throws entrepreneurs off their bearings. The proposal narrative might be only 15 pages, but often you have to provide a lot of supplementary documentation that can boost your package from 15 to 50 pages in parallel on crafting your argument. You've read the RFP, you know it's a good fit, but how can you write your story? Write what your plans are in a way that's a tight fit with what the grant wants and its expectations. Then comes the actual writing, sketching out and putting words down to paper, editing it, sharpening it, reviewing it, making sure you're formatting it right, making sure that you are within the word count, that you've put in the right images. All of this comes under that simple term, grant writing. In this video, we're going to break down these steps into a few more concrete stages and talk about each, just to give you a head start as you work through this process. Studying the grant opportunity and assessing good fit is perhaps a very, very critical and often overlooked. A key thing is to study the grantor. Find the grantors that are best fit for you. Whom are you supposed to apply to? What are their priorities? Study the solicitation. Look up past winners and see whom have they funded previously. How similar or different are you? Assess your funding requirement. Oftentimes, grants have fixed caps as to how much they're willing to fund. Does that match with what you're wanting for your development and your priorities? How close or far off is it? Basically, evaluate your trade-offs given the priorities and the resources. Speaking of resources, we have to consider timelines. Often these grants come in fixed phases, and some grants, such as the National Science Foundation, NSF's SBIRs, are rolling basis. So check in and make a list. Once you've identified the grantors that work for you, make a list of all of these funding agencies and the timelines at which they release. When prepping for grants, keep in mind the timeline, both for grant writing, but also when you can expect funds to come, and what your company decides is a priority for that time frame. So when you think of that timeline, you're bound to have a brainstorm with your teammates coming up with all of these ideas. Choose which of these are feasible within the grant's budget. Create a to-do list. Like we just mentioned, grant writing has so many components, often not enough time to go at it sequentially. Delegate, bring in team members. But having that to-do list will make sure that you have all of your pieces put together. Create a timeline of activities which will be really helpful as you're sketching out the rest of the grant. Sometimes we write this ambitious story, and when it comes to the timeline, we realize we can't deliver. So I recommend often starting with a timeline and then reverse engineering what you can do. Timeline for the grant aside, you also want to build an internal timeline for by when you're going to have to do things to make sure that you make the application cutoff. account for people's holidays. The IES SBIR typically is released December 1st week or the 1st and is due within 60 days on Feb 1st. That's not a lot of time and typically has 2 weeks of vacation time for your team. So account for all of those as you're sketching out your to-do list. Find your partners. This might be something you could do even before you have read a solicitation. Reach out to people in the field, whether they're researchers, administrators, previous winners, and educate yourself about the grant, about what goes into the grant, and how to be successful at them. You watching this video is a great first step. Coming back to grant writing, the SBIR, for example, the IES SBIR that's due in February, often, or end of January, also requires you to collect letters of support that speak to the possibility of your tool being commercial, speak to the possibility of a potential school district wanting to use your product. Those can sometimes take longer, especially if you don't have strong partnerships in place. Once you have these pieces, you also want to start documenting them in the format that the grant requires you to. So far, we've only touched the periphery of the additional things we need to do beyond even just actually writing our key narrative. When you're working through a grant writing narrative, it is easy to swing between exhilaration and complete and utter exhaustion. That is perfectly normal. My recommendation is to try and go as systematic as you can through this process. Start with crafting your argument. As you might have known, I'm a huge fan of logic models and see them as a powerful tool for you to craft your argument. Identify what are the key points that you really need to pull out in this grant proposal. Pull out what are the key features that you're going to be developing. Also, once you have those key ideas in place, or even as you're doing that, make sure you're using the template the grantor requests. Federal grants often come with a template in their solicitation. Sometimes foundations don't have a concrete template but list out what sections they'd like to see. Study the grantor and understand what template works. And then comes the critical piece. Start writing. With managing a grant preparation submission, there's so much project management involved that sometimes we want to push out the writing piece till the very end. And don't do that. You have to work in parallel in this case. But remember to just write freely. Write down how you would speak. Write down all of your thoughts as they come to you. Once you have a draft, you're going to feel a greater sense of self-efficacy to actually edit ruthlessly. Be brutal in your editing. Have someone else outside of your team look at it and see, are the ideas making sense? Have you defined key terms? Have you put together the key information that the grant's actually asking for? So the next time you say you're applying for a grant, keep in mind that you're committing to about 30 to 40 hours of just company time, if not more, in working through this process of creating ideas, identifying the ideas that best match the request for proposal and your strategic priorities, that you're finding partners or have partners in place, that you've assembled documents that you really need, and you have a team ready to work with you through all of the supporting materials, budgets, timelines, and the actual proposal narrative. It can be overwhelming, but we're happy to help if you'd like. I wish you the very best of luck in your grant applications.